Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into a topic that might sound kind of dry at first, but trust me, it's full of surprises. Um, we're talking about the history of money and banking.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're looking at this book, NADB Money and Promises, 7 Deals That Changed the World by Paolo Zannoni.
Right.
And, just to make things interesting, Zannoni's not just some stuffy academic. He's worked at Fiat, Goldman Sachs, even Prada.
Yeah, it's really quite a diverse background.
Talk about a resume, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what gives him such a unique perspective on this whole interplay between money, states, and the promises they make.
And he really dives into this idea with by focusing on 7 historical deals that really kind of reshaped the entire global financial landscape.
Yeah.
And he doesn't start in recent times. He goes all the way back to the 12th century. Our first stop is Pisa.
Okay.
And I know what you're thinking, Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Of course.
But Pisa was more than just that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a maritime powerhouse.
Yeah.
A central hub for the silk, the spice, the dye trade routes.
It was bustling. But they had a problem.
Okay.
Imagine a booming economy. Trade is happening left and right, but not enough coins to go around.
I see a problem.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
Talk about a need for some serious financial innovation.
Right.
And that's where, the legend himself, Fibonacci, comes in.
Oh, wow.
Now, most people know him for his math skills, the Fibonacci sequence. But here's something you might not know. His famous book, Liber Abaci, it had a very, very practical use for merchants struggling with this very coin shortage.
Okay.
It's not just all, theoretical equations.
I'm intrigued.
This book revolutionized accounting.
Interesting. How so?
Imagine trying to do business with those clunky Roman numerals. Right?
Yeah.
Fibonacci introduces Arabic numerals, the system we use today, making calculations faster, simpler, and more accurate. Which is absolutely critical when you're talking about, tracking those all-important promises to pay.
Right. Because you need to know who owes what to whom and all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads us to a group called the Compagnia di Parazzone e Donato.
Okay.
It's a mouthful, I know.
It is a mouthful.
But these guys were pioneers. They were one of the very first institutions to really utilize bank debt as a form of payment.
Interesting.
It wasn't just about storing coins anymore.
Right.
They facilitated trade using something that we totally take for granted today. Promises.
Promises, okay. So tell me more about how that works. How do you go from a promise to actual, functioning system of trade?
It all boils down to trust, right?
Right.
What made the Compagnia's promises valuable? Meticulous record keeping.
Okay.
Zannoni actually dives into their actual ledger in the book,
Okay.
showing how they'd meticulously track who owed what to whom, essentially creating this entire system of credit that kept the wheels of commerce turning.
Wow. So it's almost like their reputation, their careful accounting, that's what gave their promises weight.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the coins anymore. It was about the bank's reputation.
Okay.
This right here, this is the birth of bank money as we know it.
Wow. And what kind of impact did this have?
Well, it wasn't just some small-scale experiment.
Right.
The Compagnia's success, it kind of spawned dozens of similar institutions across Pisa, showing a fundamental shift in how people viewed money.
It's interesting. You think about tally sticks now and you think something out of a museum, something old.
Yeah.
But they were actually a very sophisticated form of government debt for centuries. You did imagine a notched stick, and that's recording your taxes, to the English exchequer. It's almost like an ancient IOU.
Okay.
And the crazy thing is, these sticks could be traded,
Really?
bought and sold, making them like an early form of bonds.
Wow. So it's people are literally trading pieces of wood as a form of debt and investment.
Exactly.
That's wild.
And the people who were handling these tallies, you know who it was? Goldsmiths.
Goldsmiths. Okay, so not just your jewelry makers.
Right. They were the early bankers.
Yeah.
Right. They'd accept these tallies as deposits
Okay.
and issue their own promissory notes in return.
Oh, wow. So it's this whole, it's almost like these systems emerged organically based on the needs of the time.
Driven by practical needs.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just like in Venice, the English government, they also saw this power of leveraging bank debt.
Yeah.
So during the 9 Years' War,
Okay.
they needed money. So they turned to this brand new solution, the Bank of England.
The Bank of England, 1694.
Founded in 1694.
All right, so they established this fancy new bank.
Right.
You'd think that solves everything.
You'd think so, right?
Print more money, problem solved.
Exactly. But even the Bank of England struggled at the beginning.
Really?
Yeah. Their notes were actually traded at a discount compared to coins.
So you're telling me that the bank's own money?
It wasn't even worth as much as the coins.
People weren't quite sold on it yet, you know?
Yeah, they're like, we trust the gold more than we trust your fancy new bank.
Yeah, exactly. They had to take some strategic action.
What did they do?
They started buying up those discounted tallies.
Okay.
You know, propping up their value.
Okay.
And then that, in turn, makes their notes look a lot better.
So it's all about, like, building that trust, building that confidence.
It's all built on trust.
Yeah. It's fascinating, though, how, like, war, debt, financial innovation, they're all kind of intertwined throughout history.
They really are.
Makes you wonder, were these institutions like truly tools for stability?
Right.
Or were they perpetuating this cycle?
It's a good question.
Either way, they were definitely playing a key role in shaping how we think about money today.
Absolutely. But banking, it's not just about governments and wars.
Right.
It's impacting everyday life, too.
Yeah.
To really see that in action, we need to journey to 17th century Naples.
Yeah. This is where a very unique and kind of ethical form of banking takes root.
Ethical banking, okay.
Yeah, so we're talking about the good banks.
Good banks?
These were charitable institutions, right?
Okay.
They aimed to serve both the poor and the wealthy.
So how do you do that? How do you serve the poor and the wealthy with banking?
Right, and this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile banking with the Catholic Church's stance against usury, charging interest?
Yeah. Seems like a bit of a contradiction, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It was a delicate dance.
Yeah.
They couldn't charge interest directly.
Right.
So they came up with some ingenious methods to generate profit
Okay.
while still staying true to that charitable mission.
All right. I'm intrigued. How do you do that?
One of their key innovations was this credit pledge system.
Quite a pledge.
Okay, so imagine your bank issues you like a personalized IOU
Okay.
that you can use like money.
Interesting.
That's essentially what these pledges were.
So it's like bank-backed IOUs, essentially.
Yeah.
That you can then use in everyday life.
Exactly. And we're seeing them pop up in financial dealings of all sorts of people, even artists like Caravaggio.
Wow. So it's really interesting, like, this concept of good banks.
Right.
But I'm still kind of stuck on this idea of
Yeah.
how do they create this money without charging interest?
It feels like a magic trick, right?
It does, a little bit.
Okay. So the answer lies in this very, very clever system of sale and buyback agreements.
Sale and buyback, okay.
Let me give you an example.
Hmm.
A real estate developer, he needs a loan.
Right, okay.
Instead of charging interest, the good bank would buy a property
Right,
from the developer
okay,
and then sell it back
okay,
later
okay.
at the same price.
At the same price.
But in the meantime, the bank is collecting rent on that property.
Okay. So they're essentially making money
Exactly.
without technically charging interest.
They're generating income.
That's really clever.
Right.
So they're aiding the poor, helping the wealthy, and get this, they're even playing a role in managing the government's debt.
All without technically charging interest.
It's incredible, like, how they were able to navigate all those different facets of banking.
And I highlights that multifaceted nature of banking, right?
Yeah.
And how when it's approached thoughtfully, it can actually be a force for good.
Yeah.
But we're going to shift gears a little bit here.
Okay.
From the ethical banking of Naples
Okay.
to the tumultuous backdrop of the Bolshevik Revolution.
All right, so we're jumping ahead a bit
Yeah.
to the early 20th century.
And we're going to see a very, very different approach because now we're talking about communism.
Yeah.
You might think, communist revolution, that's the end of banking, right?
Right. Get rid of all the banks.
Exactly. But that's not what happened.
Okay. What happened?
The Bolsheviks, under Lenin,
Okay.
they actually believed banks were essential
Essential for...
for building a socialist society.
Okay. Interesting. So even though they had this ultimate goal of, like, a moneyless utopia,
Right.
they still saw a role for banking in the interim.
In the transition, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So instead of abolishing the banks completely,
Right.
what did they do? They nationalized them.
Okay, so they brought them all under...
They merged them into this one,
Okay.
like Mega Bank,
Mega bank.
the People's Bank.
The People's Bank. Talk about putting all your eggs in one basket.
This wasn't just a bank.
Yeah.
This was like the nerve center
Yeah.
of the entire Soviet economy.
Wow.
They were overseeing every transaction,
Wow.
balancing the nation's ledger. This was central planning at its finest.
It's fascinating how this one institution
Right.
became so central
Sure
to
is.
their entire ideology. But it's also a bit terrifying because you're putting so much faith in this one thing.
Yeah, you're putting a lot of trust in it.
Yeah.
And reality, as it often does, it kind of threw a wrench in the gears.
Okay, so what happened? Did it work?
Well, not exactly. You see, their initial attempt to get rid of money entirely,
Okay, so they tried to go completely moneyless.
a system of pure barter.
Okay. So you trade, like, a chicken for a
Right.
loaf of bread.
It was a disaster. Imagine trying to run a modern economy, trading goods and services directly.
Yeah. Good luck trading your, like, old phone for a month's worth of groceries.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
would be utter chaos.
Yeah. It doesn't really work in a complex system like that.
Zannoni uses this great example in the book. He talks about this powdered milk factory.
Okay.
They needed a spare part.
Yeah.
Simple enough.
Right. In a normal economy, you just order the part.
Exactly. But under a barter system, they had to find another factory
Oh my gosh.
that would trade something for powdered milk.
Who wants all that powdered milk?
Exactly. So you can imagine this led to weeks of delays.
Yeah.
Production just completely ground to a halt.
Oh yeah, everything backs up.
And the cost just skyrocketed.
Because everyone's trying to get rid of their stuff that they don't need for the thing that they actually need.
Exactly. The Bolsheviks realized pretty quickly that their utopian vision wasn't so practical.
Yeah. Talk about a reality check.
So they had to come up with a new plan. Well, they didn't completely give up on the idea.
Oh.
They actually came up with this kind of fascinating solution. They decided to create, get this, not one, but two currencies.
Two currencies? What?
Yeah, so the first one, it was called the Sovznak. It was a brand new paper currency issued by the Treasury.
Hold on, so they went from trying to abolish money completely to printing their own.
It does seem a little ironic, doesn't it?
Just a tad.
But the idea, at least initially, was that this was a temporary thing.
Yep.
Just a way to kind of like bridge the gap
Right.
while they figured out their long-term plan.
Okay, so what happened? What was the long-term plan?
Well, it didn't quite work out as they'd hoped. You see, the Sovznak, it fell victim to something we've seen time and time again throughout history.
Okay.
Hyperinflation.
Ah, so prices just spiraled out of control.
Exactly. Imagine, like, prices doubling overnight, then tripling, and it just keeps going.
It's like that image from Germany after World War I, right? The wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread.
Exactly. Now, this might sound strange, but the Bolsheviks, at least initially, saw this hyperinflation as like a tool
A tool? To do what?
to destroy the old capitalist system.
Ah, so they figured if they could just break the existing system,
Exactly.
then they could build their new system on top of it.
Wipe the slate clean, so to speak.
Yeah.
But as we've seen time and again, even with the best intentions, economic experiments can have unintended consequences.
So what happened? Did it work? Did the hyperinflation achieve what they wanted?
Well, it definitely created chaos, that's for sure.
Right.
But it didn't exactly lead to the smooth transition they were hoping for.
Okay, so what did they do? Did they finally give up on this whole moneyless utopia idea?
Not entirely. They were pretty determined. They introduced something called the New Economic Policy, or NEP. And this actually allowed for some, like, limited private enterprise.
So a little bit of a step back from, like, full-on communism.
A little bit of pragmatism, you might say.
Okay.
But to manage this new system, they needed a way to manage the money, right?
Right.
So what did they do?
What? Don't tell me they started another bank.
They did. They established the state bank,
Of course they did.
and they introduced a new currency, the Schervenets.
Okay. Another new currency. And this one was, what, more stable?
This one was designed to be the opposite of the Sovznak, backed by gold
Okay.
and foreign exchange reserves. This was supposed to be the reliable one.
So now you've got two currencies floating around.
Mm.
One that's hyperinflating and one that's supposed to be stable. Talk about confusing.
Right, it's a recipe for, well, not exactly stability.
So what happened? Which one won out?
Well, in the battle of the currencies, the stable, reliable Schervenets, it came out on top.
Makes sense. People probably preferred the one that didn't lose value overnight.
Exactly. The Schervenets, it became the primary currency, eventually replacing the Sovznak altogether.
So even a communist revolution couldn't escape the fundamental principles of economics.
It seems not.
It's incredible, though, when you look back at all these examples Zannoni gives us, from Pisa to Venice, London, Naples, even Bolshevik Russia. It really highlights this fundamental relationship, right, between states and banks.
It's this ongoing dance, isn't it?
It's like no matter what system you have, whether it's, a republic, a monarchy, even a communist state, you still have this kind of interplay.
They may have their differences, their ideologies might be polar opposites, but they ultimately need each other.
Yeah, it's a bit like a high-stakes game, isn't it, where each side kind of needs the other to survive?
And Zannoni argues that this dance, it's gotten even more complex in the modern era, right? We've got governments controlling the measure of value, setting interest rates, managing inflation, but the banks, they still largely control the means of payment.
So how money actually flows through the economy?
Exactly.
It's a lot to think about. So after this wild ride through history, what are we supposed to do with all this? What's the takeaway for the average person?
Right, how do we make sense of it all? Well, Zannoni doesn't necessarily offer, a simple answer, but I think he does encourage us to just be more aware.
Okay.
To think critically about these systems that, let's face it, we often just take for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy to just, swipe your credit card and not really think about what's happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. But when you understand the history, the potential pitfalls, it just gives you a whole new perspective.
It's like anything else, right? The more you know, the better equipped you are to navigate the complexities.
Okay.
And when it comes to something as fundamental as money and banking, understanding those historical successes and failures, well, it just gives you a whole new appreciation for the challenges and the opportunities we're facing today.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I want to encourage everyone listening to check out New Money and Promises by Paolo Zannoni. It's a fascinating read, and it might just change the way you think about money and its role in shaping our world.
I second that.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.